Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the Royal Institution of Naval Architects on your CPD requirements. So we have a couple of minutes before we start this morning. So we will make a start just around a minute or so after 10 o'clock UK time. Okay, well, good morning, everyone here from the UK. It's just gone 10 o'clock, and we're going to give it another minute or so just to let attendees arrive. Firstly, I do apologise for a slight bit of confusion. I believe that some of you will have received a reminder notice of the webinar that was starting. The reminder notice was supposed to be sent to calculate your local time code. So we have members dialing in from all around the world. However, some people in one time zone have received a notification saying that their notice started a little bit later. So my apologies for that. So it is now 1 minute past 10 UK time. We'll just give it another few moments and then we will make a start. Okay, well, I think we will begin the webinar then. So firstly, thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to dial into today's webinar on RINA's CPD requirements. My name is Matt Tennant and I am the Director of Membership here at RINA, and I have charge of all of our kind of licensing requirements. I run our membership team and also look after the support of members CPD and the CPD auditing. I'm also hopefully joined on the call today by Dr. Mark Barton, who is the chair of our Professional Affairs Committee and is the team responsible for the auditing of CPD. So for those who are familiar with the team's webinars, as we go along through today, if you would like to ask any questions as we go through, please do use the Q&A chat function that should be at the top of your screens, or you can also post your comments in the chat. So please do use that functionality as we go through the webinar this morning. This webinar will be recorded and it will be available to those who can't attend today, and we'll normally make that available a couple of days once the webinar has concluded. So hopefully you can all see the slides that I'm sharing on the screen. So in terms of the agenda this morning and what we're going to be talking through, firstly, we'll be going through RINA's CPD requirements for members and what is the CPD policy. We'll be talking through how we suggest that you come up with your CPD plan. We'll talk through the types of activities that you may want to consider regarding CPD activity. We'll then pause for some question and answers to see if anyone has any clarifications on the CPD requirements. We will then do a demonstration of My Career. My Career Path is the CPD recording platform that we make available to members. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may be not, and we'll do a practical demonstration of how you can use that piece of functionality and that software. And then we have time for some questions and answers at the end. Where possible, I will try to answer kind of questions as we go along, but at the end of each section, we'll pause and take some time for questions. So that's the agenda for today's webinar, and we'll start moving through the slides. So as I said, as a brief introduction, I am the Director of Membership here at RINA, and I believe Dr. Mark Barton has just joined the call and will be on hand to answer any questions as we go through. So let's now first of all start off talking about the CPD requirement and what does continuous professional development actually mean within the institution. So this year in 2025, RINA is putting a much higher focus on CPD. So both in terms of providing supporting material for members. We will be putting on more webinars throughout the year, which will hopefully be relevant to people's CPD activity. But we're also increasing the number of people that we're going to be auditing in terms of last year's CPD activity. So CPD and supporting individuals to record their continued professional development is a big focus of the institution going into this year. So what is CPD and why do we as an institution believe that CPD is important for members to complete? CPD works in a particular cycle, and what we'll be talking through this morning is not only in terms of what CPD as a basis, but in terms of helping you setting your CPD goals and thinking about why CPD is important, looking at planning and thinking about why CPD activity is vital, and looking at opportunities for you to undertake activity that's relevant to yourself, how to record good quality CPD in case that you get selected for an audit, but also the importance of reflecting upon activities and learning and development activities that you've done, thinking about the next cycle, so going into 2026. So what we're trying to talk through this morning again is the importance of thinking about not just CPD as, oh my word, what activity can I do tomorrow, next week, the month after. We're trying to move away as an institution from an ethos away from thinking of, oh, how do I attain some CPD hours and some CPD points, to thinking it more about reflective practice, about recording learning outcomes and coming up with CPD that is relevant to you as an individual, to where you are within your career. So a little bit then of the basics in terms of CPD policy and what you need to achieve as an individual. So within RINA, all members, fellows and associate members, alongside those who hold Engineering Council registration, are required to make a commitment to maintain and enhance their competence. So if we have any individuals on the call who, for example, are just associates or student members or junior members or non-members, formally, though of course it's always important that individuals keep their skill sets up to date, the formal CPD requirements for RINA fall to those individuals holding FRINA, MRINA or AMRINA status, and those MRINA and FRINA holding Engineering Council registration. And the policy position of RINA for CPD is that those individuals holding those membership grades is to maintain and enhance their competence, and that is what the CPD policy requirement is. All individuals who are in employment. Now, we'll pause there for a moment. So individuals who are not in employment, so you may be seeking a new opportunity or not currently in work, or those who are retired. So if you are retired from the world of work and you are no longer using your skills for either paid or contracting services, or kind of exercising your technical expertise formally on a project, you do not need to do CPD activity. Though again, we always kind of recommend that people keep their skill sets up to date. But for those who are formally retired, you do not need to undertake CPD activity. And if you're selected for an audit, you won't need to demonstrate CPD activity from you done last year. But for those who are in active employment, both in terms of paid and contract, as a membership requirement of RINA, and for those who hold Engineering Council registration, are required to take and maintain steps to make sure their professional competence and knowledge is achieved throughout your career, depending on what stage of your career you are in. As fundamentally a practicing engineer, you will need to demonstrate both to RINA but also to yourselves, and the principle of being a good practicing engineer is making sure that your skill sets and your understanding of what's going on in the sector are maintained and kept relevant throughout your career. And it's important that when thinking about CPD activity, and one of the things that RINA was looking to put more support for members on is, though we focus a lot on the skill sets of practicing engineers, CPD is still very relevant to those who maybe are at different stages of their career, where, for example, they may have moved into a managerial role or a project management role or a senior leadership team role, or a different element where you're not necessarily demonstrating the practicing skills that we might assess practicing engineers to do, but you may have different skill sets and responsibilities around strategic leadership or finance or HR or project management skills or legislation or dealing with clients that have a different form of skill set from those traditionally we might assume as a practicing engineer. But there is still an importance to make sure, even if you're kind of moving into different elements of your career journey, that you're still keeping your skill set, your knowledge, and being aware of local developments up to date. CPD, and why kind of RINA thinks CPD is important, is it's not just about the importance of thinking, oh, I need to go and go to a conference to gain some CPD points, or have I met my CPD hours for the year? So as we go through the slides, and we'll talk about this in more detail, RINA is moving away, as some institutions have done, to saying that there is a set number of hours that you have to do of CPD per year. So that is no longer the RINA CPD requirements that you have to have achieved 20, 30, 40, 50 hours a year of CPD recording activity. What we say is that your activity, and you have to do CPD that is relevant to where you are in your career. So it's thinking about the importance of maintaining your skills. So how do you, if you've been working in the sector for 20, 30 years, can you honestly say to yourself, my skill set is relevant and up to date, and I know where I am in my career? Thinking about improving it. So we may have individuals on the call here today who are thinking about looking for the next opportunity, thinking about taking a more senior responsibility, thinking about maybe looking for a promotion or moving up in their career. So how may they want to enhance and improve on that skill set? And also, as I said in the previous bullet point, thinking about broadening their skill set and their activity. They might be moving into a different role or a different industry or a different sector where you think, oh, actually, is my skill set and my knowledge relevant? I think it's also important to note that there is a bit of a focus, or historically there's been a focus on CPD, to think it very much about skills. You know, have I done this training course? Have I maintained my skill in this area? But CPD can also be about knowledge, and it can be about understanding changes in legislation, about understanding changes in sector, understanding new research and innovation that is coming through. So it can also be less about thinking, oh, I haven't done any training courses in the last couple of years, but actually thinking that knowledge and understanding of topics and issues, legislation or research can also be part of activity of recording CPD. CPD can be achieved through a range of activities, and in one of the slides, or many of the slides we'll go through later, we will talk about the different types of activity that could count towards CPD. Often CPD is a very work-focused activity. It may be conferences that you attend, it may be papers that you publish, it may be training courses that you undertake, but it can be a whole range of activity, from stuff that you do within the workplace and activity that you undertake without it as well. Any activity that you do that enhances, maintains, broadens your experience can count towards CPD activity. So though it does have a high focus within the workplace, and many of your workplaces are regulated, it can be both an internal and external activity that you take on. So that is the baseline of RINA's CPD policy, and why we think that CPD is important to members. I hope that's clear from anybody. And again, we will dive into some of these areas in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides today. Okay. So the first element that we'll cover then, now we've looked at the CPD policy, is around planning your CPD activity. And again, the only sort of policy element that we're going to be talking about is that previous slide. The rest of the slides now are more about good practice and about helping members who are on the call today plan, execute and record their CPD activities. So the remainder of the slides that we go through are what we deem as kind of best practice for helping you plan your CPD activity. Many people will often, as I said in the previous, I would links their CPD activity to the workplace. And for many people on the call, this may start at particular times of the year. It can often be linked to your appraisal schemes at work, or many people's appraisals will start at the start of the financial year. Some people have it at the start of the calendar year, whatever it may be. And it often is the chance for you to sit down with your line manager or supervisor or your peer or a mentor to have a look at what you're planning to do over the next couple of years. So one of the kind of the key things that we recommend doing is linking in your CPD cycle to fixed points of the calendar throughout the year. And as I said, that could be an appraisal or your objective year within your employment. And the fundamental question about where you sit down and start thinking about your CPD is that what would you like to achieve over the next year, over the next 2, 3, 4 years in your career path and your career development? And again, these are some key questions. Again, this is not kind of reading the policy of what we're looking you to answer as part of your CPD, but these are kind of useful points to help stimulate some discussion and help your kind of self-reflections to how you may want to achieve your CPD. So the first thing that some people on the call who maybe are more junior in their career, and you're thinking about the step of moving from AM-RINA to M-RINA, so member of RINA, or you're thinking about Engineering Council registration, which a number of people on the call hold, but some of you are maybe looking to move to professional registration with the Engineering Council, is what competencies and what experience do I need to move up to that higher membership grade or to achieve Engineering Council registration? So I'll give you a nice, simple, practical example. For those thinking about Engineering Council registration, you may want to have a look at the UK specification for registration and the RINA's IPD logbooks that you can download from our website, because that outlines all of the professional competencies that you will need for registration. So having a look at that competency framework and saying, oh, I need to develop my skills in communication, in leadership and management, in project management, in how I communicate engineering terminology to non-engineering audiences. And having a look at what you may need to achieve can form the basis of your CPD plan, because then you can use that to say, how will I, over the next year, develop my skills so that in a couple of years' time, I can demonstrate that back to RINA. So another thing is that you may be wanting to seek a promotion or a more senior role within your company or a senior role within a different company. And how do I need to develop your skill set to make that case? So some people may want to be a manager for the first time. Some people may want to move into a more senior engineering role where you take on more responsibility for project management or people management, or you may want to move into the lead specialism for that particular area or a particular area in a different role. And again, part of your CPD considerations and what RINA might, legitimately look at when, if you were to be audited for a CPD, if you were to say, look, in the next 2 to 3 years, I am hoping to move into a more senior role within a different company, and here is the CPD activity that I'm doing to help me. That is a very valid, reason to why you may justify that CPD activity, because it is relevant to your role. If you're looking to move companies, you may want to move sector, move industry, move into a different organization. What kind of activity might you want to do over the next year to keep your skill sets relevant and for you to be an attractive candidate to a future company? Again, that can be CPD activity. If you're not planning on looking for it to move or to be promoted or to change companies or change roles, if you were to sit down and do a evaluation on your skill set as of today, can you honestly turn around to yourself and say, okay, how do I keep my skill sets up to date, relevant and competent for the roles that I operate? We have members in all different parts of the world doing all sorts of different jobs. Some of your jobs may be quite more regulated, and your company has to make sure that your skill sets are up to date because of the roles that you do, the kind of maybe machinery that you operate, the level of security that you might have to do. So any activity that is more regulated that you have to do as part of your day job, to make sure that your licenses are up to date or your practice is kept up to date, that can all count towards CPD activity. So it can either be forward thinking about saying, what would I like to achieve and do over the next couple of years? But equally, CPD can also be about making sure that your skill sets as of today are maintained and kept up to date, and are relevant to the jobs and the roles that you are currently undertaking as of today. So those are some useful points when you're thinking, oh my word, what do I need to do for CPD? Those are good, hopefully some good stimulation points to think, right, where do I make a start and how do I start planning my CPD activity? Another example of some areas that you may want to think about, and again, this is as a slight more focus for people on the call who hold Engineering Council registration already, and again can be applicable to those who are wanting to hold Engineering Council registration for Chartered Incorporated or the Engineer Technician. The Engineering Council's competency framework sets out 5 skill areas: knowledge and understanding, design development of processes, responsibility management and leadership, communication and interpersonal skills, and professional commitment. And this competency framework is a really good, useful skill set for those who hold registration, for those who are looking to gain registration, but also practicing engineers. To help them look at their skill set areas and go, okay, well, I think for areas A and B, I'm reasonably confident. I think I've got a good engineering knowledge. I think I know a lot about practices. I know a lot about process design, system design, product rollout, etc. But actually, you may be lacking on managerial skills. You may think, oh, actually, my communication skills aren't great. I need to maybe focus on how I talk to non-engineers or to clients, or how I lead and manage areas of responsibility. So again, this isn't necessarily what we call kind of mandatory practice, but again, it's a useful starting point to go, well, actually, what CPD do I need to do throughout the year? And the Engineering Council's competency framework is a really kind of good a good starting point. For those who hold professional registration with the Engineering Council, the CPD is very mandatory for those who hold professional registration. And when we come to do the audit, again, if you can link it back to the Engineering Council competencies, again, it's not mandatory, you have to link it to these competencies, but again, it's a useful starting point to say, where's my skill set at? What am I wanting to achieve, or how do I keep my skill sets today up to date and relevant? Okay, so when you're thinking about your CPD plan, then that's a couple of considerations and a couple of starting points, which again will hopefully be useful to everyone joining the call about how to plan and think about your CPD activity. So the first consideration, what do you need to do? So when you're sitting down either with your line manager or your supervisor, or you're doing some reflective practice yourself, what do you need to do in the first instance that firstly updates your professional competence, so that your practice is aligned with the current requirements? And that could be the requirements of your workplace, the requirements of legislation, the requirements of licensing, the requirements of your employment, the requirements of being a competent engineer. So that is a very difficult question for me to answer, because that will be applicable to yourselves, and it can only be really yourselves that have to answer that. So a couple of things we talked about in the previous slide, in that your workplace may have regulatory requirements, you may have employment requirements, there may be legislation requirements, for example, for those that work in defence or different areas. Environmental compliance could be one as well, for people who work in different sectors, and thinking about how do you meet particular environmental requirements of your of the legislations in which we all work in. So the first question you may want to ask yourselves is, how do you as an individual keep your skill sets up to date as a practical working engineer for whatever sector or so that you work in? The second question is about how you develop your personal, and for those who hold, for example, managerial or line management responsibilities, how do you keep your skill sets up to date? So for those that are based in the UK, for example, we've had a change of government and there has been some new HR legislative changes that have come in that those who maybe hold managerial responsibilities should be aware of, because it's good practice that you're aware of changes in employment law. You may think, well, that's an HR responsibility to do, but I would probably make an argument to say those who hold managerial responsibility, should be aware of changes that happen in employment law. That can be CPD activity, about taking some time to understand in legislation. And the third area that you may want to have a think about is about, for those who may be thinking about maybe moving careers, changing careers, promotions, thinking about moving roles, how do you broaden your experience leading to different career opportunities? So these are all good, valid starting points for those who are planning their CPD activity. Is what is your starting point? If you're sat thinking, what on earth do I need to do to complete my CPD? Hopefully these are some good prompts. And again, as I said in the previous slide, some good stimulation to think how and what kind of activity do I want to do throughout the next 12 months. So the next consideration, so the previous consideration could be considered more internal. So that's about you looking at yourself and about where, and doing a bit of self-evaluation to what you may want to do. The second consideration is about maybe looking externally and doing an evaluation to external factors that may influence what CPD you would like to achieve. So the first question you may want to ask yourself, and again, try to be kind of open and honest with your reflections on this. Do you know what is happening in the wider sector or the industry that you're currently working in? Do you know what's happening? What are the trends? What are the hot topics? What are things that are going on? And what do I need to do to find out more about what is happening within your sector itself? So that's kind of the first question, which is to kind of sit down and ask yourself, do I kind of have a really good idea about what's going on within the sector? So, for example, if we take maybe those that work in shipping or commercial shipping, quite a few organisations have started thinking about the introduction of WASP, wind-assisted propulsion, introducing that into commercial shipping fleets. Do people have an idea of what's going on in that thing? Are there developments? Are there research proposals? Are there hot topics of legislation, for example, coming through, which you need to be aware of? So that could be a question that you think, actually, how up to date am I with things that are going on currently within my own sector? How do my current skill sets rank against those trends and things? And what do I need to do to keep my skill sets up to date and relevant? So that's about looking externally and then kind of flipping that back onto yourself, saying, do I have, and can I honestly say to myself that I've got a good understanding of what's going on in my sector, industry, and employment world that I'm having a look at? You could also be blunt and ask your line manager for some feedback to say, okay, well, looking at what's going on in the next 12 to 2 years of work, where would you recommend that I keep my skill set up to date, relevant, and what's going on? Where do you think I need to improve upon? And sometimes, if you're really kind of struggling to think of CPD activity for the upcoming year, gaining some feedback from someone externally is a very useful prompt to think about what CPD that you need to improve upon. So taking into consideration the internal factors, so thinking of yourself, and the external factors, and you've taken a little bit of a time to think about where your skill sets are, what you need to do to improve upon them, and where do you think that you may need to maintain your skill sets. Fundamentally, then, it's then thinking about what opportunities there are to do that. So sometimes it's incredibly easy to say, I don't think I know much about this particular area, therefore I'm going to seek out training courses or developmental activity for me to gain that skill set and knowledge. There's a conference that's coming up that's run by RINA or another professional body or within the sector where it has a particular focus on that area. So, for example, in a couple of weeks' time, there's the CII conference in London, which obviously has relevance to lots of individuals kind of working in the sector and the focus on carbon impact. So therefore, anyone who's kind of working in this world, that obviously is a very good kind of knowledge and technical conference, thinking, okay, that's how I may keep my skill sets, my knowledge, my kind of networking up to date on what is going on. So once you've conducted that evaluatory activity, and it's why we think it's so important that you think about a CPD plan, it's then about finding opportunities for you about how do you then meet that, which again, appreciate may sound very straightforward, which is you identify areas of work that you need to improve or maintain your skill sets, and then you seek opportunities to do it. And that is the basis of a CPD plan. And I hope that is kind of useful to members who are thinking about where on earth do you start in terms of keeping your CPD up to date. So we're now going to talk through some examples of what types of CPD activities can be. And we have some examples, but by no means this is a definitive list of what can be CPD. But again, this is helping you think about what could you be doing in terms of keeping your CPD up to date. So we've got a list of 6 things here. So formal education and training, informal learning, conferences, meetings, seminars, presentations of papers, institution activity, and industry involvement for those maybe working or engaging with academia. This is not an exclusive list. And if you think of CPD activities that fall outside of that list, but they're relevant to you, they can absolutely count towards your CPD activity. But these are kind of what we consider the main types of CPD because they're the most common and they're what we find are the most that members deal with when they're recording their CPD. I go back to my kind of opening remarks in the presentation talking about CPD. We're saying that kind of RINA is moving away from the slightly more old-fashioned model of CPD points and CPD hours to more saying CPD is about finding and undertaking activity that is relevant to where you are in your point of your career and doing activity that keeps your skill sets up to date or broadens it. So we'll talk through these types of activities now, but as I said, this is just useful as a guidance as opposed to saying that these are the kind of the only 6 things that you're limited to when you're thinking about your CPD recording. So we'll talk through formal education first, and what do we kind of mean by formal education? So this could include things like face-to-face education, distance learning, short courses, formal on-the-job training. So anything that you kind of are approaching this through I'm going on a training course, I'm doing some distance learning, I'm attending this kind of short course. For example, earlier in 2024, I went on a 2-day course on the ISO 9001 quality standards. So that is a formal kind of training program that you can do. Not all, but most activities will involve some sort of assessment towards the end of this, where it's kind of testing your learning. Not all of them do. So, for example, short courses may not, but certain kind of more courses that have maybe a longer duration or involve the issuing of a formal qualification at the end will have some form of assessment. So, face-to-face education, any kind of learning hours, research undertaken can all count towards people's education styles. Though it is only a recommendation, it's a nice thing to kind of mix and match some of your kind of educational stuff with other different types of CPD. So though it's not an absolute maximum, we do say like try to keep it a bit varied towards kind of different sectors and different areas, but formal education can count towards this. So the next type of activity is around informal learning. And here is a type of activity where some members may think, oh, I'm not sure this counts towards CPD, but well, hopefully the bit that you take from the call this morning is that absolutely informal learning can count towards CPD. And it can be around a range of things from books, journals, manuals, reading up on activity, on-the-job learning, private study, things that you say within the workplace that you say, do you know what, I don't know much about this area, I'm going to go away and research a little bit. It could be you taking time to think about how you're going to improve upon your career. Absolutely, informal activity that isn't through the kind of the more structured, I'm going on a training course, I'm going to attend this particular program, I'm going to do this to a particular course, can count towards CPD activity. So if we go back to one of my external slides where I talked about an evaluation of external factors. If, for example, you think, oh, do you know what? There's a really interesting journal that's been published on a new topic that is impacting my sector, and you think, do you know what? I'm going to take some time to read and understand that a bit more. Yes, it's not under that kind of formal learning banner, but informal activity is absolutely relevant CPD activity. And historically, members have said, oh, I'm not 100% sure because there's not a CPD badge next to that particular thing because it's not been sort of accredited by an external provider. But informal learning is absolutely a relevant CPD activity, and hopefully a takeaway for yourselves going, oh, actually, if I've undertaken a piece of kind of private learning, or I've done a little bit of activity, during my lunch hour or at home to keep my skill sets up to date and relevant, this can absolutely be logged as a relevant CPD activity. Conferences and meetings then. So this hopefully is reasonably straightforward. This can include conferences, workshops, technical meetings, symposiums, seminars, where that has a learning element to it or has a knowledge element to it. We'd probably say, for example, networking mornings maybe don't have that much CPD relevance, but of course, if you can make the case to RINA, you can. But generally, kind of attending conferences, seminars, things can absolutely count towards CPD. So we kind of very much encourage you to go to. These can be run by the institutions, but they can be run by kind of any conferences and activities that you attend. Probably maybe trade conferences have less of a CPD relevance. But if there is some kind of learning and development that you're having to do as part of attending or presenting at a trade conference, you can absolutely kind of use that as part of it. We'd probably recommend that if you're logging CPD, you put a bigger focus on conferences that have more of a technical aspect or have more of a kind of a learning and development side to it, as opposed to, for example, as I said, moving away from a trade conference or something that has a little bit more of a transactional purpose, but they're still having relevance. If you are presenting at a conference or you're working towards putting together a paper or submitting a thesis or a submission for consideration, any research or any time that you spend working towards that submission, you can also count towards CPD. So make sure that you know how you have conversations with your line manager or supervisor about attending these kind of conferences, events, webinars, etc., etc. If your local RINA branch does a CPD webinar or does some form of presentations or technical topics or anything like that. Some branches even do CPD kind of topics that you should attend to. RINA, as I mentioned at the start of this call, this year we'll be doing more kind of lunch and learn CPD activity based on kind of skill sets and interpersonal skills and little kind of technical and that can all absolutely count towards CPD activity. So again, it's a more traditional form of thinking about CPD, which is about attending these events, but they are kind of really important to do. So a little bit kind of going back on what I was talking about with conferences, but presentations and papers for conferences, courses, workshops, seminars, symposiums, internal work conferences can absolutely count towards this. Even if you're thinking some people in certain companies look to have their papers published in transactions or in technical journals, or that's kind of what you're looking to achieve. Work spending towards the preparation of any kind of presentation or writing of papers can absolutely count towards your CPD requirements. So, institutional activities. And here is where I'm going to do a little bit of a plug for this. So if you are attending any RINA standing committees, if you are on any committees or boards, if you undertake PRIs for candidates looking for professional registration, if you work with myself and Mark on course accreditations, working on technical papers, coordinating conference, any kind of volunteering activity that you may want to do, that is around supporting the institution, or other institutions or professional bodies that link back to your practice as an engineer can absolutely count towards CPD activity. We have a lot of individuals who work in academia, so who work or have links to their local universities, colleges, or those who are actually kind of teaching in academia. So any work around research, research practice, any engagements through industry-led research or design projects, are working on presenting kind of training courses, or any kind of developmental work that you're doing that improves your practice is to do with kind of updating your sector knowledge. Research work that you're kind of doing between companies and industry and vice versa can also absolutely count towards it. What maybe is less counting towards academia is kind of your business as usual. That might be kind of tutoring or lecturing, or that kind of the act of doing that. But absolutely elements around research, sector knowledge, keeping yourself up to date, kind of cutting edge technology, research in the area can absolutely count towards CPD activity. So I appreciate if we have anyone who works in academia on the call, we've focused a lot of the content today about the kind of practical things in the workplace. But absolutely, for those who kind of work in academia, keeping your skill sets up to date is equally relevant. But again, that can also come towards about keeping your teaching practice and keeping your skills up to date in that particular area as well. So we talked about those kind of 6 activities that you have done for your CPD. And again, those are 6 broad areas of work. And again, it's not limited to those 6, but hopefully that gives people on the call a little bit of a flavour in terms of the type of activities that you could do. It's not an extensive list. And as long as you can say the activity that you've done is relevant to where your career is, it can potentially count towards doing CPD. We'll now come on to talking about learning reflections. And about the importance of, once you have undertaken some CPD, to think about, once you've done that activity, what have you learned from it? What have you taken from it? How do you know that activity was worthwhile? So when you are filling out your record of your CPD and your CPD logs, RINA often is less interested in simply the activity that you've undertaken, but hearing more from you in terms of what you took from that particular activity. Was it useful? Was it not useful? What did you take from it? How has your practice been maintained? Has it been improved? As a basis of that activity, what may you do the same? What may you do different? How may you amend your practice to do so? So when you have completed your CPD activity and you're thinking about your CPD log that we're going to kind of come on to in the last 20 minutes, where we're thinking about recording CPD, it's important that you spend a little bit of time thinking. The key question that I would ask as part of a CPD reflection was that activity useful? Did it do what you needed it to do? And what have you taken from that particular course? So if I use the example of doing the ISO 9001 program, my reflections would be, I have learnt about the quality standards of creating quality systems, and I have learnt some technical knowledge about, should we become accredited, what would the standards be? So that's kind of a very kind of simple, practical example to do so. So learning reflections are a really key part of CPD, because when we're looking at your CPD logs, we'll be interested in what were your learning reflections as a result of doing that activity. So we're now going to pause, and I'm going to see if we have any questions that have come up in the Q&A. And then we're now going to talk through the actual kind of practical considerations of how one actually will record your CPD on the platform, the My Career Path. So I'm going to pause to see if we have any questions in the Q&A function here, and see if we've kind of got any questions here. So there's a question who is registered as a CEng member, and I think As a member of RINA who is registered as CEng, should we currently select two profiles, Chartered Engineer and RINA IPD, and should we write records for each profile? So I will come on to that in a second when we come back. They are fundamentally the same thing, but we'll hopefully demonstrate that when we do the My Career Platform demonstration in a second. So thank you for that question. So, question from I think it's John Russell or Russell John. Apologies, I think it has changed the name around a little bit. Is RINA planning to include CPD articles in the Naval Architect, perhaps with multiple choice questions? I'm aware of other professional bodies taking this approach. So, really very good question. For those that have might seen some articles that have been published more recently, the RINA is launching a new Naval Architect. We're kind of refreshing and redoing the Naval Architect magazine. We're not formally planning on including CPD articles, but I will absolutely give that feedback to our new lead editor for the magazine about putting in potentially CPD content into the Naval Architect, and I think that's a really good suggestion. So. Question from Reyes: if we are busy and we don't get time to do these activities. Now, what I would say is that RINA is moved away from saying that you have to do a number of set CPD hours a year. So we appreciate that in years gone by, we may have said you have to do 20, 30, 40, 50 hours of CPD a year. And we're moving now to saying that you need to do activity that's relevant to your career. I would hope that if you were to take a whole calendar year worth of activity, you should be able to schedule some sort of learning and development or reflection activity, as simple as reading some articles and journals that are relevant through to more formal training programs within 12 months. So I would hope that the new, more reflective requirement that we have, you should be able to schedule it in. So there's a question from Paul, which is about trade exhibitions broaden your knowledge of the wider industry and what's going on. So it provides significant learning. So can these be considered CPD, even if you have less no formal environment? Yeah, Paul, absolutely. So if, for example, one of the kind of learning outcomes from attending a trade conference is about broadening your knowledge to the wider sector industry. Yup, absolutely. That can absolutely count towards CPD activity. I think the example that I talked about with kind of trade conferences is where, for example, it has, often potentially more of a sales focus, and if you're more there in that kind of capacity, that may have a lesser CPD focus. But one could argue that if you're there in more of a sales capacity role and you want to keep your skill sets up to date on the best practices for selling products and services, that can also count towards CPD activity. Informal learning includes webinars, or are they considered formal learning? It can be both. It can be both. So, for example, if you're doing a 1 hour kind of lunch and learn webinar on a hot topic, to an extent, RINA doesn't mind too much if it's more formal learning or informal learning. It's if you can kind of fundamentally say what you took from that activity. So it doesn't kind of the titles that we put underneath it don't matter as much, as long as you can kind of say what your learning outcome was from that potential activity. So, as a question on industry involvement, so professional, it's a question from Maria. So professional networking is not a valid industry involvement. So if you were to, for example, attend a networking event, the simple act of attending the event, you may say, well, what have you done as part of that activity? But if you can say that you have done some sector learning, that you've enhanced your communication skills, that you have learned or fundamentally taken something away from networking activity, that can absolutely count towards CPD activity. I'm going to take two more questions, if that's okay, and then I'm going to move on to the demonstration, because I appreciate we've got around 15 minutes left. So, as a member and fellow of RINA, with a chartered engineer, I have approximately 33 years of managing experience with various projects, mentoring junior and senior engineers. How should I submit and record, and how can I demonstrate it? So My answer to that is around looking at yourself and your experience. So I'm going to pull out two examples of this about managing related projects and mentoring junior and senior engineers. So my question back to you would be, if you were to look at how do you undertake mentoring? So if you've looked at the act of mentoring junior engineers and senior engineers, what are you mentoring them on? Is it about professionalism requirements? Is it about safety legislation? Is it about improving their personal skills? So my question back to you would saying, are you confident that you are a good mentor? And how do you know that you're a good mentor? And the act of asking yourself that question may highlight some things that say, well, what training courses out there for me to improve my mentoring skills? Have I taken some feedback to how good I am as a mentor? How do I know that I'm keeping the information that I'm mentoring these people up to date? Legislation, requirements, professional requirements change. I work with mentors on making sure that their knowledge is up to date so that they can give the correct information back down to the people they're mentoring. So that could be something that you might want to think about in terms of your practice. Again, I will come back and reiterate what RINA is interested in is, are you looking at yourself? We can't tell you what CPD to do. The act of coming up with your CPD plan is about you looking at yourself, identifying where your skill sets are. Are you up to date? Are you knowledgeable? Are you keeping your skill sets relevant? And what do you want to improve upon? And then you doing the activity that you can say, okay, yeah, I've achieved that. So I hope that's useful. But unfortunately, RINA cannot tell you what to do as part of your CPD. Part of the act of coming up with a CPD plan is about you identifying yourself. What do you need to do? So there may be some more questions, but we'll hopefully have some time at the end. I'm now going to move from the presentation slides onto my career path to do a practical demonstration of how you may want to log your CPD. So a little bit of background then to what my career path is. So we launched my career path in March of this year, and it's an online platform for members to record their CPD activity. It's been designed and built by the UK Engineering Council and is used by about 50% of other professional engineering institutes in the sector. And the CPD platform is a way for you to create a CPD plan, record CPD activity, gather feedback from your employer or line manager, and also produce some CPD reports for you to then download and use. So a little bit about my career path. Using my career path is not compulsory. So this is not you don't have to use it. It's a tool that is available to you. If you have a company CPD system, if you want to put activity locally in a Word document or store it, that's absolutely fine. This is just a tool that we make available. You don't have to use it. My career path won't tell you how or what to record your CPD. That is for you to identify and do. It is simply a tool for you to record your activity. RINA does not have access to your CPD records. What you record on my career path is confidential to you. We do not see what you've recorded unless you give us permission to do so. It's a very secure system. It has been built to very high information security standards, and we don't see what you've recorded in my career path. We've developed a single sign-on, which means that you don't have to register. And what I'm going to be demonstrating with you now is how to use the area. So I'm going to quickly come off from the presentation slides, and we're going to move on to how to access my career path. So some of you may have done this already, but some of you may have not. So hopefully I'm now sharing my web browser. This is the RINA web page. In the top right-hand corner of the page, you've got a little person icon here. Select this icon, and this will take you to the login to the My Account area. If you've forgotten your passwords or you need to reactivate your account if you've never logged in and you're having problems logging in, there'll be some contact details at the end on how to do this. Once you've logged into our web page, in the top right-hand corner, where you should have your name, you should have profile, and then this is the profile page that comes up. there should be an icon that says My Career Path. So if you select that, let me try to log in again, in case it's timed out. Perfect. So slight panic there to make sure I can actually log in. So this is what My Career Path looks like, and there should be no registration. It should automatically move in from your page here. And this is what My Career Path looks like. It's an interactive tool where you can record your CPD activity and the different types of activity that you may want to do. There's two boxes on the right, on the top right-hand corner here, which is called plans and evidence. Plans, hopefully it should be quite self-explanatory, is where you can create a CPD plan for the year. You don't have to, but it's a very useful tool for you to create a CPD plan of what you want to achieve throughout the year. Evidence is where you log your CPD. And here is where you create the individual CPD logs. And I'm going to show you in a second how to do this. First, if we navigate back to the home page, you can firstly what's called create a profile. And there are certain profiles that you have available. And again, these are completely optional, but we make them available to you as part of the kind of the My Career package. So if you hold professional registration with the Engineering Council, you can select your grade that you hold. And what this means is that when you log activity, you can log it against the Engineering Council 5 competency areas that we spoke about before. You don't have to do this. And if you're not Engineering Council registered, you don't have to select any of these profiles. Again, this is just a useful tool for members to plan their CPD activity against. So there was a question that came up earlier, which is if you're chartered, which profile do you select? Do you select the top 3 ones here, or the RINA ones, the RINA areas here? I'd recommend that you select the actual chartered engineer grade, and that is kind of relevant to you. The other grades are for individuals working towards becoming chartered. So I'd recommend if you hold an Engineering Council grade, you do that. If you're not registered and you don't want to be registered, you can select a profile. It means absolutely, you can select that. That's absolutely fine. It's just a kind of a useful tool to record your activity against. So we'll then look at creating a CPD plan. And what does that CPD plan entail? Now, creating a plan can be very, very, very straightforward. This is not a detailed plan. So your plan could be enhance my line managerial skills. And you can select from the drop down, and this is based on those categories of activity, what kind of plan it is. Is this about formal learning? Do you want to formally go on a managerial training course, or is it about an informal learning or whatever? You can write your objectives within that, and that can be as long or as short as you want. I mean, this is your CPD plan. There is no formal requirement or guidelines to how you create this CPD plan. This is for you to use and for you to make best. So what you choose to put in these boxes is completely down to you. So you can write pretty much anything here. You can put a start and an end date. So you may want to start it, last month, and you may want to do the plan right up until the end of the year. Again, there's no right or wrong. I think this is completely for you to do. You can share your plan with a line manager or a supervisor or a peer or a mentor by putting their email address in there. You can make as many plans as you want, or you do actually have to put some text in that box there. You can write as many plans as you want. It's completely down to you. And here, this is our test environment, and you can write as many things as you want within that area there. So how do we actually record your CPD logs? Because this is predominantly what the My Career Path area is for. Again, in the top right-hand corner, you select evidence. And here is where you can create your CPD log. So just as an example here, you could say you attended the RINA CPD webinar on CPD, a little bit meta. So under the activity description, you can write what the activity was, attended a webinar. But as I was talking throughout the webinar here, the fundamentally key element to this is about, for example, what you took from that activity. And you could say you learnt about how to complete CPD. And the date, it doesn't really matter, but we'll just put any old date in. If you think that that activity is relevant to a profile, you can then select it here. And if you want, and again, this is again only really if you're interested in or have registration, you don't have to, but it's a useful tool. You can link it back to the Engineering Council competencies. Again, it's optional. You don't have to do this. You think it might be relevant, and you can select kind of different competencies and add them in. If you want, you can upload supporting information. And you can put supporting documents, a CPD certificate, something you learned from that. Again, the system is secure. Any documents that upload, you can't share it to RINA. If you want someone to review your CPD log, get some feedback on how you've done, you can put the email address in here, and that will send them an email saying that Matt Tennant has done a CPD log and would like to get your feedback on that. This is as simple as it is about how to record something. So you put the title, you put the activity description, you fill out the learning outcomes, you put the date in, you can select a profile if you wish. You don't have to do this to recap. You can add the competency from the Engineering Council it relates to if you want. You can upload some supporting documents. Again, not mandatory, but sometimes it's kind of useful as a bit of a recap. You can also add somebody to add comments and review it. And if they do provide any feedback, it turns up here where it says review comment. So if you click save, that will then turn up in your CPD profile. So you can see here, it says attended a CPD webinar on CPD, and that's what we've just recorded now. So these are just some example logs here. Now, somebody very astutely has put in the chat, they see it difficult to see how a RINA annual dinner might count as CPD. I would probably agree. This is just an example of how to, these are just example logs just to say what you could record as part of your activity. So hopefully that all makes sense in terms of how to use My Career Path. It's a free available tool for members. It's very easy to access. You can create your CPD plans, and you can also add all of your CPD evidence there. So we're now kind of coming to the end of the webinar, and we are at our hour, so I appreciate people may need to drop off for other meetings, but we have a couple of questions, and if you want to ask a question, please do put it into the chat. So I'll also bring in Dr. Mark Barton here. So Mark, the floor is yours if you want to add anything else to what I've covered this morning. So whilst you do that, I will just have a look to see if we've got any questions that we need to answer.
Hi there. I'm just going to try and answer quite a few of those questions. I started off answering them individually earlier on, and then we're getting a lot the same. So two sort of, they seem to generally come around, what can you count? And what does the future ramping up of auditing look like? So you can count almost anything. The important thing is that you reflect on it. So, you know, could it be a conference? Can it be a networking event? All these sorts of things. You know, could it theoretically be a dinner? Well, it could be if you were giving the presentation. So all sorts of things could count if you can reflect on it and show that it meets what you need to meet to develop. What part of that is, of course, doing is checking for yourselves that you are doing everything you need to keep yourself current and active as a naval architect. So there is no set hours. So it could be that you only do a few bits of reading journals and other bits and a couple of conferences. It doesn't have to be a big burden. And I would suspect, because I saw one comment earlier about being busy time, we had one of the reviews for that year, this year, which we did, and the person was actually doing masses. They said they were too busy to do it, talked about what they were doing in their job, and you went, well, this and this all count. You're doing it. In fact, you're doing more than we think you need to be doing. So it isn't a very high burden. The key thing really is about that, thinking about what you need to do to keep competent, doing things, reflecting on them, and just saying whether that got you there or not. And that way you can work out whether you need to do something next year or whether you're already there. As a couple people asked about the ramping up of the process, we have to do that. It's a requirement of the Engineering Council. So we've got to get to 5% of members being audited every year, which means we'll be about quadrupling the numbers we're doing. And we'll do that in 2 stages, so a significant number. Process terms, it won't look any different from this year. When you get your request to be audited, you will have a form to complete. You will also get an example that has been completed to try and give you an idea of how you can complete it, or you can share your version of My Career Path with us as an alternative way to do so. But the auditing shouldn't be driving anything you're doing. I suspect a lot of us, if we were honest, if we got audited, we'd then have to quickly write it down and might not have been quite so good at our record keeping. But it should be all stuff we've been doing anyway. When we do the audit, we will look through it and just try and make suggestions to you. The key thing of the audit is that you respond. So you can happily complete the audit by saying, well, actually, I am now semi-retired, as I am. I'm only ticking over professionally, but I am keeping myself up to date, making sure things aren't changing in those areas by reading relevant papers. And I'm participating in RINA activities or other mentoring activities, whatever it is, as an example. So it's very easy to do. You don't have to be doing much. It's about responding to the audit. The one thing that is a big issue, and we've just had some of the other institutions have now started removing people for it, is not responding. You can respond with, I can't, I'm on maternity leave. That's fine. It's not a problem. So it's the response that's required in the audit. Does that answer people's questions, hopefully?
Super. Thank you, Mark. So I appreciate that we're over, but I'll just try to get because quite a few other questions have turned up in the box, and I'll try just to kind of rapid fire through just a couple. So if you're chartered with IMRS, do I still need to be chartered with RINA? So to the best of my knowledge, you can hold what's called dual registration. So I think you can be chartered with both institutions. There are some odd technical things around who has the lead things. But if you're interested, please email the membership team and we can find out. Question from Matt saying that we had previously and there was some slide information about the kind of the maximum and minimum amount that you can count towards this. It is mostly guidance that we have available to it. So we kind of recommend that people try to balance a range of CPD activity, but we're not going to hold your feet to the fire in terms of that. What we are looking to say is that we want people to have a range of activity, but we don't really kind of hold it as a policy that if you say that you've just done one sole bit of activity, we're gonna kind of hold it. It's more kind of guidance to help members think about their plans as opposed to kind of any policy area. Another couple of questions, because I know we are a little bit pushed for time. Can CPD activity apply to both RINA and a local engineering professional body requirements? Yep, absolutely. I mean, the question comes back to if it's relevant to you and your career and where you're at, you can absolutely be relevant to do that. There's a question that's come up in the chat as opposed to the question box, which is about confidential material to do so. So the way in which we can get round material that is very, very confidential is that we don't need to have too much information, if not any information, about the learning activity. You could say that you undertook a particular form of training that helped you to relate to a confidential matter within that, where I had to keep my skill set whatever up to date. So RINA does not need to know the specific detail of what that particular activity is. You can be very careful with the wording about what you took from it and what you learnt from it that keeps the material light. And we work with a lot of people in defence, and we're very used to dealing with people's work experience documentation where material is confidential. So you please don't worry about that. So there's a question about how do we input activities in my career path platform. Hopefully we've covered that. There is actually a more detailed video on our website that you can go back and watch on the CPD page that talks about how to do that, and we go through it in a little bit more detail. So hopefully I've covered how to record that. Would attendance of a working group for a research project count towards CPD activity? Yeah, if you can put together a good learning outcome of what you took from that activity and why attendance to it was relevant to you and what you learned from it, yep, absolutely, it can count towards that. A question around, I've been involved in maritime industry as an NGO, can that be considered? I think I'll probably, without going over the same answer again and again and again, if you can justify it and it's relevant, yes, it can count towards it. So there's a question from Warren, and I think we will try to wrap things up so we're not too much over. Around we're ramping up the auditing plan. So Mark's already covered the auditing for that one there. On the flip side of that, RINA is going to be producing more guidance, more CPD webinars, more lunch and learn type activities to help people meet their CPD requirements. So though it is ramping up, we're also going to be helping members through the process to it. So we'll take just a couple more questions here. Is there a way to link the evidence back to the plan in the online objectives? I don't think there is, unfortunately. We don't have that much customization in my career path. It's a really good bit of feedback that you'd like to create a CPD plan on my career path, and then when you log activity, you can then link it back to that. I don't think there is the functionality to do that, but it's an excellent suggestion, Duncan. I will feed that back to the developers who do my career path. If I join another organisation such as IMRS, do I need to apply for Engineering Council registration? If I'm already registered through RINA, you will need to ask IMRS that. We have a process if you want to come the other way. If you want to come from IMRS to RINA with your registration, you'll have to ask IMRS what their thing is, that one there. There's a question around, can we request a early audit of CPD? So if somebody wants to do a pre-audit audit on it, depending on the time of year and the busyness, we maybe can give some feedback. If someone would like to have it in, it's done on a very kind of first come, first serve basis based on the resources that we have available. Final question around will this be made available? Yes, absolutely. This webinar will be made available afterwards with the presentation and the slides. And we are also going to be doing this webinar again later this year. So I think as we're 10 minutes over, and I appreciate everyone needs to go back to their time. So thank you everyone for joining the call this morning. I will put the final slide up on the screen, which is the contact details for our membership team. So if you have any questions about CPD, my career path, any area of work, please do get in contact with membership@RINA.org.uk. If I haven't answered your question and you have something which we haven't answered, I'm going to try to go through the questions that we've had answered and try to pull out ones that we haven't been able to, and I will try to contact people separately. But if you do have any questions about my career path or indeed the wider CPD requirements, please do get in touch with us. So I think we will draw the webinar to a close for today. Firstly, thank you everyone for staying on 10 minutes more than initially planned. It's great there's been so many questions, and apologies we didn't get around to answer everyone. Hopefully this has been a useful overview in terms of the CPD requirement, and also encouraging people to use the My Career Path recording tool if you want to be available. Any questions, clarifications, points that you'd like to readdress, please do get in contact with us. So on that note, we will draw the webinar to a close. Firstly, thank you so much for everyone's time today. Enormously appreciated. And I wish you the very best of luck with the year, and hopefully a good CPD plan from us all. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.